Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and I'm joined once again by JP Mason to talk about all things Celtic. But the first thing I noticed, JP, welcome back, is that cracking, now retro away jersey over your right shoulder. It's there for a reason. Talk to us about that season and your memories of that season.
Well, I have to be honest with you straight off the bat that isn't the original top that I had, that I bought as a then 19-year-old sprightly Celtic supporter. I had a long sleeve version of that top, and when I was studying in France, in Nice in the year 2000, I obviously had many Celtic tops with me, and that was the Barnes season. I went to Nice to live a couple of weeks before the Inverness-Cali game, and I became friends with a German guy called Damien in my class, and he was a massive Borussia Dortmund fan. And when I was leaving in Nice in the June of that year, I gave him my long-sleeved Celtic away top as a gift. So, and I did receive a really cool Borussia Dortmund scarf and patch and supporter songs tape in the post as a
brilliant.
Yeah, really, really nice of him. And you know what German people are like. They're very kind of, I don't know, efficient, and when it comes to, it didn't just send me something wee and random back. It was like a full Borussia Dortmund package that I got. So, but yeah, I managed to get a hold of that top maybe about, I don't know, I think someone gave me it maybe about 10 years ago, someone from my old supporters club. And yeah, it was my first season as a season ticket holder. I'd been on the waiting list in the season of 97-98. So I'd just been getting tickets as and when I could at that point, and then finally got a season ticket of my own, which I have right here.
You're going to have to flick through that. It shows the old style, man. Shows the old style season ticket. So, it was like a Raffle ticket book, wasn't it?
Yeah, so basically for all you, I can't believe I'm saying this, for all you young ones out there, you used to have to send your voucher away. Each voucher applied to a game, and then if you wanted to get a ticket for an away game or a European game, then you had to send your voucher away, or you applied either through your club, supporters club as a group, or you applied individually. But yeah, so the Wenger season, I love Dr. Joe. I know that he wasn't the most successful manager we've ever had, and I think you and Laura touched upon it last night, how he carried himself, and that's true. It kind of reminded me a bit of my granddad, because he was obviously Czech, and I hope I've got that right. He was Czechoslovakian, right?
Well, I was reading this thing that Jock Brown had said, that famous headline, blank Czech.
Yeah.
And he said, they didn't even get the headline right because he wasn't Czechoslovakian. So just while you're telling that story, I'm going to check myself. Yeah, pardon the pun.
Well, my grandfather was Polish, so they had a similar way of delivering English, in sort of broken sentences, broken sort of words, maybe not completely all joined together at the time, like special qualities, players, movements, passing, things like that. And that was just like my granddad. So I immediately had an affection towards him because of that. And then obviously, he signed Lubomir Moravcik, and I'll never forget that I came home from wherever I was and I checked teletext and it said Celtic signed £300,000 Lubomir Moravcik from, I think it was Duisburg. And it's like 33 years old, but then you're thinking, that guy must be all right. But then your immediate thoughts have to go back to your sort of Wayne Biggins days, and, we're just signing another guy that's past his prime. And then, of course, that would be my first Rangers game at Ibrox was with Dr. Joe. It was a 0-0. Do you remember Larson hit the crossbar? Mm-hmm. Ronnie was in goal. And me and my friend Michael and John Smith were on the TV that day on Sky Sports, because the camera went to the Celtic end and zoomed in right on us, and we were standing on our seat with a tricolour, singing. And when that was an early kick-off that day. When I went back to the pub that I was working in that night for a shift, all the guys in the pub were all Rangers fans, and I walked in and they were all like, "Yeah, we've seen you," and I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah, we've seen you on the TV. You're on Sky Sports." And I was like, "Oh dear, we've seen you standing on your chair." And I was like, "Oh no." So that was my first appearance on Sky Sports, and then 5-1 game. Like Lubo standing there bemused at having scored 2 goals, and then Burchell coming on and scoring. And I knew Mark Burchell from a school camp that I went on when I was in primary 7. So seeing a guy score for Celtic that you actually know and have have met as a wee guy was amazing. And I'll go back to see if you remember the 7-1 game at Motherwell that season, when Larsson scored 4. Right, I was there that night. And for the last 20 minutes of that game, I've still got the whole game on taped off the TV. The last 20 minutes of that game, the whole Celtic end sang Cheerio to 10 in a row. Solid. 20 minutes, solid. There was no break. It just was like, just as you thought it was finishing, it started up again, and it went for 20 minutes, and it was what a buzz. And then obviously one bit. Lubo Moravcik got injured that night and carried off on a stretcher. And a lot of people I've read saying that was probably the end of our title challenge that night when Lubo got taken off. And I wouldn't argue with that, to be fair. And I think, it just shows you how key things like Julian getting injured against Dundee United, could that be a similar moment that derailed further our season this season? But, it's buts and maybes.
No, but when you brought that up and you have the time after the event, after speaking to JP, to really consider that and think about the impact of this mini revival that we had kind of gone on during that period, and then Julien's injury obviously derailed it again in many, many respects. But no, I think it was a great point you made. That season in itself, it is all about specific moments that stick in your mind about all of these periods of Celtic history. I mean, I think what Jock Brown was referring to was, although Josef Venglos was born in Czechoslovakia, by the time he comes to Celtic, the region he was born in was now part of Slovakia. I think that's Jock Brown with his lawyer's head on, looking at facts. But we spoke the other day there about the disrespect, really, that was being shown to people coming into our game. We've seen it with Wim Jansen, we've seen it with Joe Venglos, and of course Lubo himself. But just looking at that jersey, I remember all the Celtic jerseys through my lifetime, because that particular jersey at the time, I wasn't a massive fan of it. I really wasn't a massive fan of that away jersey, and it's one of the ones now that when I look back on it, and obviously having done the research for the Celtic jersey book, shameless plug, out later this year, I started to really take a shine to this shirt. And I think the reason I didn't like it is I love the Celtic crest to be full colour, so green, white, black, and this is going to that style whereby it was integral to the design, so it was black and lime green, and that became the norm for a long time, still is with a lot of clubs, but I prefer the full colour Celtic crest. But in actual fact, I can't see it from here, JP, but there's a shading in the black, and it's the Celtic crest, and it's kind of half under the lime green and half above the lime green. There's actually a variety, there's a variation, a very, very rare variation. This is where the anorak comes out, because I did the studying with all the match-worn collectors. There's just a black and green version that we only wore it in Europe. So there's no shading. So if you ever come across one of those jerseys, it's a real rarity. And obviously the numbers on the back with no name, because it was the European games, But when you look at jerseys, it reminds you straight away of a player. I'm going to tell you who that jersey reminds me of, and it's a bizarre one. Vidar Riseth. Vidar Riseth.
I knew you were going to say that. I absolutely knew you were going to say that.
And I don't know why, but Vidar's the man that I think of.
Yeah, no, I said it almost exactly the same time as you said it, so I knew you were going to say Vidar Riseth. I don't know why either. I think it's just because maybe he was specific to that. Was he specific to that season? I can't even remember how long Riseth was there after. Obviously he played in the Barnes season because he scored in the League Cup final against Aberdeen. But yeah, for some reason, like a dark night or a European night, maybe against FC Zurich or something like that. Remember we played them? I was just checking the European games that we played on. So we played Croatia Zagreb and got beat. Although listed in the Wikipedia, they're listed as Dynamo Zagreb and not Croatia Zagreb, which is strange. But remember that was Prosinecki and all that. They were a good side.
Very good. And then Marko Viduka. Yeah,
we got their striker. Which, I mean, thinking back, that was a huge signing for Celtic at that time. That was, quite a coup to get somebody like him, because I mean, he surely must have been on a lot of clubs' radars in Europe at that point. It wasn't as if we just plucked him from obscurity. He'd obviously played in the Champions League and was. Well, I mean, probably was an international at that point, I would imagine, or certainly knocking on the door. His girlfriend was absolutely dynamite.
Ivana, yes. The reason that her name is quite fresh in my memory, she was obviously a very pretty girl, but John Potter, who's now the assistant manager at Hibs, he played for Celtic. His first club was Celtic. He signed for Celtic as an S form. We went to the same school. And he was head and shoulders above anybody, JP, one of the players that you knew was going to make it as a footballer. Yeah. So his first club was Celtic, and he captained Celtic reserves on the night that Marko Viduka come back to make his first appearance, which was against St Johnstone reserves. And he waltzed into the changing room whilst all the other players were already ready with their boots and everything on. He kind of waltzed in with Ivana on his arm. So, he did what he liked, did Marko Viduka, But there is a sadder tale to that, obviously. And I don't think, going back to the way the press treated Wim Jansen, Lubo Moravcik and Joe Venglos, the way they treated Viduka when he was suffering from mental health issues and he went AWOL, the way they treated him was absolutely shocking, wasn't it?
Yeah, they kind of hung him out to dry from memory. It was just kind of a real sort of critical take on his situation, which if you were to fast forward that now and make it now, if the press was to, act upon him the way they did then, they would be chastised, and rightly so. I do remember a game down at Greenock Morton, and my friend Dave McGeechan will remember this as well, but we won, and it was on Sky Sports. It was a Tuesday night, and it was absolutely bucketing with rain, and it was just so bizarre to see these guys, like Mark Viduka, and you're thinking, God, that guy's played Champions League football and he's playing here down at Greenock Morton in the Scottish Cup. And remember the toilets. I'd never been to that ground before, and going into the toilets, which was basically just a sort of like makeshift shed with a trough on the floor where you did your business into. I mean, obviously one of the types of business, not both. And it was just I remember thinking such a weird contrast for like these superstars,
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're bringing back memories now, because obviously the jungle toilets were famous or infamous for many, many years. But the worst experience I've had, we really are going on a tangent here because we're going to be talking about Barkas in a moment, was Central Park in Cowdenbeath. It literally is a wall. It's just a wall. And there might be a gap in the pavement or something where everything goes, but it really is behind the wall, which is bizarre. It's like being transported back to 1954 or something like that. In the deepest, darkest Fife, JP. But Joe Venglos, rest in peace. I mean, obviously the team wore the black armbands last night. I do also think back to a couple of things that, with a tinge of regret, Mark Burchill, you've already mentioned. I thought he was the next prodigy coming through at Celtic. I thought he was going to be the goal scorer for years to come. He had loads of potential, that turn of pace, prolific goal scorer, but he never really got a lengthy run in the side. How can you when, before long, Martin O'Neill comes in and you're up against Larsson, Sutton, eventually Hartson. And of course, he turned into a bit of more of a journeyman footballer after that. I had high hopes for Mark Burchill.
Yeah, I did too. I really, really wanted him to do well because, he's from like sort of my neck of the woods, Livingston. And, like I said, I met him at school camp. His nickname was Mouse at school camp. Because it was. I remember obviously I was buying the Celtic View religiously at that point, and I remember seeing an article about him, and it was just like, West Lothian youngster Mark Burchell has done this and that in the youth team or the reserves or whatever, and I was like, Mark Burchell, that's Mouse. That's the guy that we met at school camp. We never kept in touch really. I never saw him again. It was just one of these things where you were together for a week as schools, and then you go your separate ways, and you start high school. He went to St Margaret's, I went to St Kent's. But I did meet him. He came to our Tommy Burns supper, and as the February of '99, and I went up to him and said, "All right," and he remembered me, which was really, really sound. Straight away, I said my name, and he finished by saying my surname, which obviously is unforgettable when you think of the oxymoron that it actually is. But he remembered me, and I had a wee chat with him at the top table, and he was. He was buzzing to be playing for Celtic, and I said to him, "Man, to see you score against Rangers, there was nobody going more daft in the stadium that night than me, because yes, it was the 5th goal in a rout, but for me, just seeing him score a goal, like seeing somebody you actually know, like, and knew before he was at Celtic and all the rest of it, like score a goal in that game with the stadium rocking was." It was Larsson that set him up, I think.
The thing with Burchell, what I loved about him, he had that cool kind of celebration. It was like the original Ronaldo celebration. Yeah. Just
pointed out like that. Yeah,
cool as a cucumber. Yes, the Scottish Michael Owen, but it didn't quite work out for him, unfortunately. But whilst we talk about, did he get a bad injury? Did he lose a yard of pace? Was that what done him?
I think he did well out of his move to. I can't remember. It was a team that was at Portsmouth. He went to Portsmouth. He did.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we got an all right fee for him at that time, maybe a couple of million, and I think he did all right out of the sign-on fee. And then he was just. I think he's been pretty canny with his money. He went. I think he's got property. You'll have to excuse me. That's lovely.
That's a delivery. So what I'll do whilst you're away getting that, JP, is I'll have a look at some of the comments coming in from our listeners. So welcome all to the show on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. Last night was a victory, albeit it was a bit of a, when you're looking at the game and you get a couple of goals, one fairly early in the first half, one fairly early in the second half. When it comes to 60 minutes, Celtic seem to run out of ideas a wee bit now. Stephen Kenneth, what began as a 10-in-a-row season has descended into laughing at our manager's contradictory and absurd statements, most recently about our goalies, and being insulted with the club's loathsome self-preservation. Now, obviously, I have been very critical of many aspects of Celtic over the last few months, but I was watching that last night. I'm trying to make sense of all the comments coming out of the club, and a lot of that obviously is coming from Neil Lennon, almost exclusively so. And I'm getting the impression now, there was something very interesting about the comments around Jeremie Frimpong. JP, welcome back. I'm talking about how the season has descended into where we are now. And slowly but surely, some people may think the knee-jerk reaction was Lenny out. And we've seen the banners coming out, peaceful protest outside Celtic Park, and it's gone on from there. It's gone from bad to worse with things outside the football, with the Dubai trip and everything else that entailed. But I'm now of the view, JP, that I don't think Celtic are going to make any changes. I think, the biggest changes that we're going to see will be to the personnel, and even then, I don't think it'll be massive. Jeremie Frimpong, I reckon, will be one of possibly 2 players that leave. When we bring in replacements, I think it's going to be fairly underwhelming, going by what Neil Lennon said. The words he's using is loan signings and bargains. And I think the reason for that, and this is having taken everybody's views on board, listened to everything that Neil Lennon's got to say, and trying to be as balanced as possible. I actually think that Celtic are just going to ride out this season. They've written off the league, and I think that's happened over the last month or so. They've written that off after Dubai. And now what they're saying is, it's all about getting through this financially stable, because there are going to be other clubs around about the country and all over football, European football and beyond, who won't get through it. They'll either not get through it at all, or it'll be such a financial hit that it will take them years and years to recover from that. So I think that is at the heart of all the decisions that are now being made. So even though they might look at Neil Lennon and his coaching staff, JP, and they might think a change is actually better at the moment, they won't do it because of the financial implications of getting rid of a coaching staff, bringing in potentially a new coaching staff from another side, which would have cost implications. We're going to ride it out. We'll probably sell a couple of players, but once fans are back in the stadium, at least we will still be on a good financial footing. That's not my view, but I think that's the way that Celtic now as a club are approaching this. Peter Lawwell, we know when it comes to figures, that's his thing. That's what he excels at. And I think that is the view. And the biggest disappointment for me, if that is the view, JP, why aren't they communicating it to us as a fan base?
I don't think they can figure out how to. I think we've been very critical of the way that they've communicated so far. And if it's either a statement and then it's through Twitter and, on the website or whatever, and then, you look at what Peter Lawwell did with the interview with Jerry McCulloch, that got pretty much slated as well, by and large. And I think they're probably sitting there trying to figure out what angle. I think your angle of addressing the support before our home game, I think that would be great. I think that would be, I certainly would feel like you were involved in something that's unique. Not unique to you, but you're part of something that's not just readily available, on YouTube for other people to mock, etc. If it's streamed live to you, then there's no interference. It's direct to the. I don't want to say customer because we're certainly, it doesn't really feel well. It does feel like more like customers at the moment than supporters because we're not actually able to reciprocate with any support really. Be it on at the games or even just like buying a pie or a program at the game or anything like that. I doubt anybody is buying. I mean, you can't really get anything to do with the game. I think they give you a virtual program or something as part of the thing. I've not taken anything of that up. I just watched the games. Obviously, watched last night. So yeah, I think they're probably trying to figure out their best angle, and I would hope they are taking advice from qualified people as to what might be the best way to go forward. Because whatever move they make to do that, it has to be right. It's just like I said last week. Whatever move they make, if they're going to make a move in the managerial market, that has to be right. And I wouldn't just go out and get someone for the sake of it. But you've mentioned a few times about the payoff for the coaching team. Would it not just be that they would be paid off from now until May? Because surely Neil Lennon signed a contract, a 12-month rolling contract starting in May, and it would expire in a May. So you'd only really be paying 4 months. It wouldn't be necessarily the full thing.
I was reading just last week because, again, you hear the terminology rolling contract, and apparently what it means is every day you wake up, you've got a year. However, within that contract is obviously what happens if we pay you off, and there'll be a package available to the individual. So the figure that was first mentioned was 1.2 million. That's now been kind of scoffed at, and apparently the figure is closer to 300 grand. But I think what's happened is Celtic have realised that no matter what they do now, in terms of a change, it's not going to save this season. But the frustration is, surely we should be looking towards next season. And this isn't an opportunity for me to bash Neil Lennon. Of course, it's not. It certainly is not. But I do think now the club are thinking, what is the point in changing the manager now? Because if they did have a plan in place, then the new manager, you would guess, would have a say in player recruitment. They would be assessing a squad and saying, well, in actual fact, I think I can work with Jeremie Frimpong. I can make him a better player. I can take him to the next level. And then, because the moves are coming and going, and I expect to see a couple more in and out over the next few days, for me, it reeks of a club who are not going to make that change. But I just wish that the communication had happened. Now, I know that certain parts of the club are communicating with certain groups. So JP Taylor, support liaison officer, has been speaking to the affiliation. I wasn't in the meeting because I'm not part of the affiliation, JP. So Kevin's going to give everybody the lowdown on that when he's back in on Monday. You're not missing anything earth-shattering. If there was something that we had to give to the Celtic support, we would. It's just that it's an update from JP. And we're obviously waiting for the response, the review. The results of this review as well. It's been raised a few times by the press pack when Neil Lennon does his press conferences, but we're no really further forward in that. And again, I can't take credit for the suggestion that something should happen before a game. I think it was suggested on this podcast via the comments section, but I think it's the best way. Because you've got season tickets, 54,000 strong season ticket holders all logging in to watch the game. They speak to us, and it doesn't have to be. It would be great if it was interactive. Of course it would be. I mean, these things can be monitored. Not every question pops up on the screen. Otherwise, it would get a bit fruity in here. That's for sure. And again, it could be monitored, and they could be filtering in some of the questions, and controlled to a degree. But it would give you a sense that the club are listening and willing to engage. I think that there's other things happening in the background in relation to engaging with podcasts and platforms like a Celtic State of Mind. Something we've been pushing for a long time, JP, and it's not again a way of basically being part of a message. So we've always looked at the Celtic View. Like yourself, I was an avid reader of the View for decades. I probably bought it for about 30 years, and when you look back, it's a great document of what was happening at the time. But of course, it is the view of the club. It's always been the view of the club. And that's caused a few problems in the past when certain contributors were saying things that annoyed people at the club or players, etc. And that has been an issue. And of course, Not the View called it Pravda. They called it Pravda, this propaganda engine. So with regards to that, if you're an independent podcast like a Celtic State of Mind, and you do eventually get access, which would be great, then it needs to be on an independent basis. So you can't be basically given a message to then filter out to the fan base. You need to challenge that message. You need to question it. And then, of course, if you're able to, you can use some of the content on the Axon Bulletin. That would be my take on it. You might get one question to ask Neil Lennon. What question is it that you ask him? Well, it needs to be a challenging one. It can't just be a question whereby you're going to get a company message that you then deliver to the support. You need to challenge various things. And I mean, there's so much at stake this season that you would be challenging probably during every press conference. But that's part and parcel of being the manager at a top football club. So when you're challenged, and I think Neil Lennon's been challenged quite a bit over the last few weeks, and I've always been saying, why always Neil Lennon? Get someone else out there to take the heat off him a wee bit. John Kennedy, get him out there. Gavin Sharkey now has given interviews when he was the interim manager. Get him out there, because Neil Lennon takes it all on his shoulders, and I think it started to show over the last couple of weeks, JP.
100%, yeah. I'd never really heard Gavin Sharkey speak before until those two games that he was in charge, and and he certainly obviously knows how to deal with the press. It's not as if he was a rabbit in the headlights. I actually thought he spoke okay, and I wouldn't have any, I wouldn't have any issue with Gavin Sharkey coming out and speaking after the game instead of Neil Lennon or John Kennedy for that matter, because, like you say, the workload should be shared, but then it just makes you wonder we're all wondering what the relationship is like between them. We've been told that it, John Kennedy has been a rock to Neil Lennon. That might well be true. I don't know. I have no idea what the relationship is. But going back to something that was pointed out about Lee Griffiths sort of having a go, if he did, I think the headline, he never actually said what the headline said. Like, fans have short memories. He didn't actually say that. So he was quoted as saying something completely different to the actual article. But the inference was there in the article that we, should, remember what's happened in 9 in a row, quadruple treble and all that. That's fine. But we've absolutely fallen off a cliff in terms of where we were. If anything, that makes it worse, because, we've gone from this, sustained period of unprecedented success to being out of everything and being so far behind. And I know that there's mitigating factors to that, but you can't just expect people to go, oh, well, because we've done so well in the past, it's a completely different, scenario we're facing now, whereby we're not, if the Ross County result was a complete anomaly, a one-off game, the cup game, you'd have been like, okay, these things happen. We've been beaten in other seasons in cup competitions, and it just goes to show how amazing that run was.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't that wasn't a standalone moment. You look at European performances against Sparta Prague, and it was just horrendous. And then obviously you've got draws coming out your ears in other games. Thankfully, we were able to win last night. I think we would have won a lot more comfortably last night. I don't know what the level of shots were in terms of blocks and saves and everything else, but I mean, it could have, on another night, they could have taken a real hammering from us if things had fallen a bit better. But, I was just happy to see us, play well to a point and win.
The big thing with that, every season, I mean, even when we're looking back to Brendan Rodgers' first season in charge, there were certain elements of that season, albeit we were unbeaten, that you win a game, it's a 2-0, it isn't a great performance, but you just move on because you get the win, and that's what's important. I think because of where we are just now, JP, you're looking at every single nuance of Celtic with a critical eye because of what's happened this season, and we have fallen off the edge of the cliff. Only 2 defeats domestically in the league, of course, but loads of draws. And, when people are saying I must have been a masochist last night because I'm watching Celtic TV on the laptop, and I've got the Hibs game on the left because, I'm an optimistic type of guy, but I'm a realist as well. Yeah, I don't think we're going to win the league this season. Of course I don't. But I keep my eye on it because that's what I'm invested in here. This is, I'm watching a Celtic game. I don't expect us to drop anything. Will Rangers drop anything at Easter Road? It's one venue you would expect them to get a game at. Obviously, they did get a game. It was 1-0. There's a few flashpoints that are frustrating as hell when you look back on them and you see former referees looking back at them in the morning. But it's been one of those seasons, and the margins for me, even if you were getting the run of the green in terms of refereeing decisions, we've simply not been good enough, JP, this season. We as a club, if you're just going to look inwardly, we've not been good enough. Our performances haven't been good enough. But let's have a look at the Hamilton game, because I agree with you, possession wise, we were under no threat. There was a couple of moments that really sum up our defence this season, whereby a ball over the top, really wrong foots Greg Taylor and they get a chance, or a cross, wrong foots Beaton and Duffy and they have a fantastic chance, and Moyo probably should have scored. Thankfully he didn't. But the big talking point last night was the team selection, as it often is, with the fact that Barkas is out, and that's why we've ran with the headline, Barkas, massive investment in the goalie coming in. We all wanted Fraser Forster. I think universally we all wanted the big man back, the great wall, Legrand Morala. Is that right? Is that what they called him in Barcelona? And we kind of thought, and what difference would he have made this season? Probably a big difference, let's be honest. But it wouldn't have legislated for all the other mitigating circumstances that we've had to deal with. But Barkas has been a massive disappointment. But we've been told he's a number 1, and that's why he come back in after his injury for Connor Hazard. Connor Hazard's now been called a number 3 during an interview with Neil Lennon. And we go into this game, I fully expected Barkas to be in goals. Bain is now the number 1. So when you're looking at that situation, and I've got some comments coming through saying, well, if Barkas is no longer the number 1, then get him out on loan. Well, if he's not the number 1 and he's not adapted to Scotland, I mean, the way that Neil Lennon described it was he hasn't been up to speed with the game. It doesn't look as though he's adapted at all, not only to the game, but to, the move from Greece over to Scotland. It's not worked out. Sometimes it happens in football. I'm pretty sure he could go back to Greece and become an accomplished goalkeeper again and be the international number 1. And it was just a blip in his career. It simply hasn't worked out. What do you do in this situation? Do you cut your losses, JP? Do you to see, can you move him back to Greece? What kind of fee would we be looking for realistically? We've paid anything from 4.5 to 5 million for him. Do we take half of that? It's a big hit.
I think it depends on the player, really. As we saw, Frimpong wanted to go and he's gone. It wasn't. The money had to be right. And by the way, on that, I think the money if that is the fee, 11.5 million, to get that for Frimpong in his position, in his current form, I would take that every single day of the week, because I just think there's been a glare. Before I go on to talk about Barkas, briefly on Frimpong, there's been a glaring sort of thing missing. And if Frimpong is worth 11.5 million, what price is Christopher Ajer worth? You've got a guy who can play centre half, right back, and arguably probably midfield as well. Plus, I think Frimpong's height in that position is always going to hinder him. I don't know how it'll be interesting to see how Bayer Leverkusen utilise him going forward, because I don't think he's a right back. We've all said that, he's not a right back. So what is he? Is he a right wing back? But then if he's a right wing back, he gets caught out, So it'll be interesting anyway. But back to Barkas, I think it would depend on the player, depend if the player's happy. How is he settled in Glasgow, if at all? Living on your own in this climate at this time of the year in a lockdown. I know it's been mentioned before, and it's the same for everybody, but then it's not the same for everybody, because everybody's got different circumstances, and people have got things going on that you might not even know about. Like close friends might have things going on that they've not divulged, and really difficult things. So it depends on him whether or not he feels like he can do the job at Celtic. Whether it's because ultimately, you ask the guy the question and say, look, are you up for this challenge? Do you think you can do it going forward? Stevie Woods will have a massive part to play in that as well. I'm very sure Stevie Woods was not involved in that decision last night, because it's not as if Lennon's like some sort of, he makes all the decisions and, is, not taking into consideration what his coaching staff are saying. I would be fully sure that he would be consulting with Stevie Woods over this, and they obviously felt that Bain was the right guy to play last night. Obviously, you didn't have all to do. I saw a comment from a guy called Robert J904-27282 saying PJ thought both centre-backs were terrible last night, and not for the first time. Well, I agree on the not for the first time patter, but I actually watched Shane Duffy and thought, you look all right. You look like you can actually play a bit. And I know arguably he wasn't playing against the best side and all the rest of it, but he needs a couple of performances like that. If he's going to be playing between now and the end of the season, he needs a couple of performances against so-called lower opposition to just get his confidence back up. Because you look at the camera, every time the camera goes to him after something's happened, he looks, so annoyed with himself and just kind of woe is me and all the rest of it. And I think as well, Barkas is probably sitting there going, I've not played in front of a steady defence this season. I've not played behind a steady defence this season. Look at some of the mistakes they've been making. So they probably not helped him in any way. Whereas Scott Bain, I think Scott Bain's just grateful to be at Celtic. I don't think Scott Bain is of any has any sort of grand thinking about his stature. I would certainly hope not, because I don't think he's as good enough. He's good a keeper as all that. I think he's a good keeper. I don't think he's a great keeper. And so I think he's just come in, and because he's obviously he's based here. He's probably got more of a support network around him. But they've decided to trust him with the jersey for now. I found it concerning that he said that Neil Lennon said that. What did he say? His quote about Barkas was he's not showing the stance. I can't remember what he said. You'll need to remind me if you know it. But his quote last night about him was to me was quite concerning. Whatever it was.
See the thing, JP, and again, that's my camera dropped out twice on this broadcast. I think there's the gremlins are back. The thing with Celtic, you could take it through the 9, you could take it even longer than that. There are certain areas of the park that we've not really had to worry about before, or for some time. And when you think of the goalkeeper situation that Celtic have been in for quite some time, a considerable length of time, we have been well served. And this is a big thing. It's not a situation that we are used to. This goalkeeper crisis, because if you go back, we've had Fraser Forster, Craig Gordon, and it goes on and on. We've had a whole list of excellent goalkeepers where that hasn't been an issue, and now all of a sudden it is. But allied to that, the other issue is we've not had that central defensive partnership that could offer that stability to a new goalie coming in, and that's something that, at the beginning of the season, who were your two centre halves? Well, it was Ajer and Julian. Now, I would love to have Ajer and Julian at centre-half at this moment in time, but there's so many different reasons why we don't. The big one being Julian's had a couple of really bad injuries this season. He's out for 3 or 4 months. He could be out until the end of the season. And because of that, and because of what's happened with Frimpong and El Hamid, which, two other issues, Ajer, who is now arguably our best centre-half, is now playing at right-back. So everything that you kind of thought was solid is been really crumbling this season. So the goalie, that's not an issue. You've got Forster or Gordon. Go further back, you've got Boric. You've got a whole list of really good goalkeepers. All of a sudden, it's a big issue. Your centre-halves, you've got a centre-half partnership if you want to go further back, and Denayer and Van Dijk, and you've got Ajer and Julian. You think, right, not as good as Van Dijk and Denayer, but a solid enough partnership. That hasn't been able to flourish. So I've described it previously as a perfect storm, and it has been. A lot of the mitigating circumstances are out with our control. I think what we've done wrong is we have actually created a situation where we've been the architects of a lot of the issues ourselves, JP, and that's a frustration, isn't it? I mean, who would be playing left back after Kieran Tierney goes? Well, we've brought in Bolingoli, we've brought in Greg Taylor, we've brought in Laxalt. So left back becomes a problem, whereas before we had Izagiri followed by Tierney, so it was never an issue at left back. So we've kind of got used to having areas of the park that we're confident in. This season we've not been confident in any of these areas. Right back, right, so who's our right back? So Frimpong has been utilised there by Neil Lennon, who's obviously a big fan. El Hamid, an international player who for any number of reasons hasn't performed or hasn't played. And then behind that, obviously you've got Ajer covering there. Behind that, you've got Ralston, who's played 1 game for Celtic in 18 months. So the whole defence, the 5 areas of the defence, have been under scrutiny. And normally that isn't a concern for us. It's huge. It's a massive issue.
Just question marks next to positions, whereas previously there was never question marks. There would always be a consistency there where, you had somebody that was just there, they played 30 games a season, and they were solid, and they gave you performances. Obviously, with Tierney, they gave you excellent performances rather than just okay performances. But I would settle for just okay performances consistently from one player in those positions, rather than this sort of constant chopping and changing. But we've had to constantly chop and change for so many different reasons, whether it's injury, whether it's self-isolation, whether it's suspension. People completely forgot about Scott Brown last night. Wasn't in the squad at all because of the red card. And touching on Beaton at centre half again, last night he gave away a free kick towards the end. Now, fortunately, we were 2 goals to the good, and it didn't. A goal for Hamilton at that point certainly would have put the wind up us. It would have put the wind up me if they'd scored that late on, because you're just thinking, oh no, here we go again. But he shoved that boy over on the right-hand side. And it was a foul all week, and he's moaning, complaining, going back into his position that it wasn't a foul. But it was a foul. He fouled the guy, and he gave away a free kick, which allowed them to put a ball into the box late on in the game. Exactly the same thing as Laxalt did in the Hibs game. Exactly the same thing as many other players have done this season. But, he just needs to... he's going to obviously be playing. We've not got anybody else at the moment, but it's just so frustrating to watch somebody. And you can say what you want about him not being a centre-half. He is a centre-half. He's been playing there for 3 or 4 years now. Like, any time he's played for us recently, he's played centre-half. I think he's played centre-half for Israel as well. So, that was a worry.
It's a big concern, because I guess what I'm getting at, you thought, who's your right back? Well, your right back's Mikael Lustig for years. A very successful signing by Neil Lennon, as it happens. But he was a stalwart of the Celtic side. Has he been replaced properly, sufficiently? No, he hasn't, because we've struggled in that position. We've played El Hamid in and out. bad injuries, maybe some other personal issues that were reported and then denied by his agent. Frimpong's come in, like you say, never a right back, but he's been deployed there. We're now playing with someone else who's not a right back being deployed there. So since Lustig's gone out, has our recruitment been good enough? Arguably no. Since Tierney, the Izagiri Tierney run, since that ended, has he been sufficiently replaced? No. Is it a recruitment issue? Perhaps. Then you look at the centre halves. Ayer and Julien, yeah, we've been unlucky with Julien's injury, but has our recruitment been good enough when you're playing Shane Duffy, who it's not worked out for, but you're playing someone else out of position in Beaton? Again, so we're playing guys out of position. Does that solely come down to the bad recruitment over 2 or 3 transfer windows, JP?
It certainly does, yeah. I mean, you go back further in the right-back position and look at the likes of Moritz Bauer, Jeremie Toljan, neither of whom would fill anybody with confidence. I don't even know where Toljan is now. Somebody will probably put in the comments that he's, starring week in, week out for some top side on the continent, and fair enough if he is, but he didn't look like he could do that for us, and he cost us that game in Valencia. I'll never not believe that. Like, when he got red carded in that game, when he got done by the boy, we were playing well that night. I wouldn't go as far as to say we would have got through because we had a mountain to climb, but he gave us about 10 mountains to climb when he got red carded. So I'll always have a bit of needle for Jeremie Toljan. But I think the recruitment has been mental for a good number of years, and everybody knows it. But the thing is, a friend of mine said about Frimpong leaving, I said, I was once described as not knowing if I was going for a shower or a shave when I was playing a game at East End Park. Me and my mates hired East End Park and played an 11-a-side game, and a guy said to me, and it stuck in my head, and I was like, I'm not losing this game because he said that, and we won. But he said, he doesn't care if he's going for a shower or a shave, and I always kind of thought that about Frimpong. Whenever he gets anywhere near the edge of the 18-yard box, yes, he has some skill, yes, he has pace, but he genuinely didn't know what he was doing at that point. It's like, panic stations, where do I go with this? Do I go to the byline? Do I try and cut it back? Do I chip it? Do I look for a player? So, thinking about... going off on a tangent here about Frimpong. What was it? What were we talking about there?
Well, you started off by going on about another Jeremie Toljan, and whilst you were talking about Toljan, JP, I checked him out. He's still with Borussia Dortmund, but he's on loan and he's playing his trade in Serie A at the moment. So he's probably a decent enough player. But again, it's interesting that you said that, because we tried Toljan, we tried Boyer, and they came in on loan. We've never replaced Lustig, and by the way, I think Lustig had come to the end of his time at Celtic, but we haven't sufficiently replaced him. We've not sufficiently replaced Tierney either.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say. I was texting a friend, and she said, "Oh, well, I wouldn't want Lennon to get the money to spend on a replacement." And I went, "Neil Lennon doesn't sign the players, though." And then she went, "Well, yeah, good point, but So basically, if Lennon isn't signing the players, which it doesn't seem like he is, because if there's the same system that's in place as what it was when Rodgers was there, with the whole Shved coming in and I've got about 1 million wingers and all that, that system hasn't changed between then and now. Surely, I don't think it has. So you've got to wonder how much influence Neil Lennon even has in the signings, and that I can't stand the fact that is the situation at our club, that the manager doesn't sign the players, and potentially Peter Lawwell that's signing the players, or a mixture of Peter Lawwell and Nicky Hammond, who seems to have his cards marked, from the reports that you read going forward, because, this whole idea of like a transfer committee and then being presented a number of players, like, surely, like, that means there's just no power in the manager. There's just no power. He's just a guy that takes coaching and gets given players and has to work.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's taken me a while to get my head round as well, JP. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, I'm out of touch a wee bit, but I always believed that the manager was that man, within reason. I mean, we've spoken about Moravcik. It was undeniably a Joe Venglos signing that Moravcik came into the club. You think about Brendan Rodgers, there's some people that I don't think anyone would deny Rodgers wanted and got. Toure, for example, Sinclair, they were Brendan Rodgers signings. But then when you're presented with a German internationalist who plays 60 minutes in a year, there's no way that Brendan Rodgers wanted Marvin Comper at the club. I mean, listen, I'm surmising there, but I'd love someone to counter-argument that one. You've got a £1 million defender and you won't play him because he's not your man. And I think the same's happened with Neil Lennon. It was quite clear that he wanted Forster. I mean, he made that clear. He's worked with Forster many, many times in the past at Celtic. We didn't get him. How many other players? And this isn't me now standing up for Neil Lennon and saying it's not his fault. I just think the recruitment is a massive factor in this. And all it takes is 3, let's say, bad or substandard windows, JP, and then your closest challengers having 3 fairly decent windows, and it can totally flip on its head. And, I'm going back to Tierney, I'm going back to Lustig, but I think it has taken a long time to unravel. And then with all the mitigating circumstances, we've not been able to deal with it. We've not been able to handle everything happening at once. We're now in a situation where we're looking at Duffy, we're kind of resigned to the fact he's going to be here till the end of the season. He's a Celtic player and I will get back behind him, of course I will. But I'll also critique him if he's not playing well. I'm looking at that centre-half area. I'd much rather Ayer was in there. As good as he is up that right wing, I'd much rather he was at centre-half, him and Duffy. Failing that, can Laxalt play in the centre-half area? I know El Hamid can, but he never does. Lustig could play there. He played there for Sweden. He rarely played there for Celtic. And I think when Lustig was getting older, he probably should have played more games at centre-half. But these are the things that we're now faced with. We're talking all about the back 5, including the goalie. Barkas, it doesn't look as though there's a way back for him. But then again, will we be able to ship him out permanently? Probably not. It's one of these things that there might be interest in a loan deal. Does that work for Celtic? Well, probably 50% of his wages will be paid by the new club. Then, do you run with Bain and Hazard? Just like we're looking at the right back situation, do we run with Ayer, Elhamid and Ralston? They've been non-committant really in terms of the transfer talk, JP. Where do you think? I mean, for me, we need a right back, we need a centre-half, potentially a goalkeeper. Do you think it really is in those areas? Is there anything else that you think, you look at and you think we need to strengthen elsewhere?
Well, I think if he's going to persist with the formation that he's been playing, we 100% need a right back and a centre-half. I think those two are completely at the top of the list. Whether or not the Ben Davies, is it, from Preston, whether or not that deal, there's a lot of talk about that, happening in the summer, but maybe it could happen, prior to the summer. I would hope so, because we need strength there. I really don't want to see Neil Beaton playing centre half. It's just simple as that. I just don't think, especially alongside Duffy, because Duffy's had his own limitations and has struggled, obviously. So for Duffy to play anywhere near what we know he should be capable of, having someone competent alongside him is surely a prerequisite. So, I would say, a right back who can play right back, I would love to know about all these signings and the detail of them all, and, whose idea they were and who's suggested them as a player and everything else. But, when you said you weren't defending Neil Lennon put himself in this position by accepting the state of the club as it was when he joined. He didn't get to bring his own coaching team. He was clearly, maybe he wanted them. He was fine to proceed without that happening. And he's obviously been fine to proceed and go back into the job with the recruitment the way that it's set up. Mm-hmm. So he must be sitting there really frustrated, because he's going, these aren't my players. I didn't really want to go and get this guy Barkas. He's been presented to me as an option, probably maybe the only option, and I've maybe had a sort of say in it, but ultimately it's kind of like, no, this is happening. we think this is a good deal, and sort of so should you.
Yeah, is that? I mean, the more we speak about it, JP, the more it kind of paints a kind of bleak picture, because is that one of the biggest issues? You look at Neil Lennon, Mark 1 as a manager, and you look at the guys he was bringing in, Anthony Stokes, Joe Ledley, Gary Hooper, and you think, well, for me, and again, I don't know for sure, but they're Neil Lennon signings, aren't they? I know for a fact Gary Hooper was a Neil Lennon signing.
Absolutely.
And now, in order to deal with a situation where there's a whole committee, there's a recruitment process where Nicky Hammond is the head of that recruitment process, and everything has to be vetted by Peter Lawwell because he signs the checks, and then you've got all your scouting network, and the players are presented to Neil Lennon, and although he might fancy Ivan Toney over Albion Ayeti, there's no guarantee he'll get that. A coach, one of these progressive, forward-thinking coaches that we keep hearing about, probably can deal with that, because the devil's in the detail. They're a coach, so they look at a player and they can get a tune out of him. Neil Lennon might not be there. He might not be that man. He might be the guy that needs his own men to be playing for him, because he's identified him, and he knows that in order to get some goals and create something up front, Anthony Stokes is my man. The penalty box striker, Gary Hooper, and he can trust them because he's identified them. Is that a bigger part of this issue? This recruitment problem is obviously not suited to the way that Neil Lennon works.
Yeah, I think so. I massively think so. It's even just after these few minutes of conversation that I'm almost certain, because you do think back to your Ledleys, your Hoopers, your Stokes, fair enough, they were all a bit Jack the Lad, and that's a reflection of the manager a little bit, isn't it? Because, he's definitely had a bit of that about him in his time as a player and obviously as a manager as well. And so, when you're getting guys coming in that you aren't 100% behind, but then if you look at the quote from at the time we signed Albion Ayeti, who has fast becoming, an anomaly. What is going on with Albion Ayeti? No one really knows. But it was attributed that Neil Lennon persuaded him to come to Celtic, and it was almost like Neil Lennon went out of his way to make sure that Ayeti came to Celtic, and he needed convincing, and Neil Lennon convinced him. So if we're to believe that, then he is a Neil Lennon signing, but not acting like it's a Neil Lennon signing right now. Neil Lennon isn't acting like it's a guy that he's hung his hat on, because he's not getting real sort of chances or game time or anything. Whether that's to do with the player himself and how he is in Glasgow, how he's developed as a player since he's been here, or developed as a person maybe as he's been here, because maybe his character has changed in this environment. You don't know. There was an interesting quote attributed to, is it Barry Fry? Is he the Peterborough chairman? I don't know if this is accurate. I saw it in some article, but it was a quote from him saying the lad wanted to go to Celtic, but Celtic effed about, and therefore he didn't go. And then you look at his stats, he's scored 16 goals in 23 games in the Championship and however many assists, and you're just like, well, how many has Ayeti scored? How many games has Ayeti played? So
it's frustrating to hear that, because again there's real similarities to the John McGinn deal, the now infamous John McGinn deal. I'm going to go to this message coming through from Vinnie Jack on Twitter. Janssen equals Larsson, absolutely, because he had the inside track on Larsson's deal at Feyenoord, having worked with him previously. He knew there was a get out clause, which is the only reason we got Larsson for 650 grand. The best 650 grand was spent. But this is the thing, even back in the days of Tommy Burns, we all know that Tommy utilised a scouting network. Davy Hay was involved in that, whereby they were identifying players. Sometimes they were identifying them, sometimes it were presented to them. And I remember the story around Pierre van Hooijdonk. Now, he was at NEC Breda at the time, prolific goal scorer, unfit, JP. His conditioning wasn't right at that time, and I think Van Hooijdonk has admitted that since then, because he became a fine specimen, a proper athlete by the time he was at Feyenoord, scoring free kicks against Rangers and taking his top off. When he signed for Celtic, I don't think he had that same conditioning. But basically, his agent was sending videotapes. You've shown us an old season ticket. Back in the day, the videotape would be sent out to clubs, and a videotape was sent out to every Scottish and English top flight club, showing the showreel of Pierre Van Hooijdonk. And the reason I know that is I remember Kevin Keegan talking about it when he was a manager in Newcastle, and he'd been given this tape of Van Hooijdonk. You know, do you fancy this player? So Celtic obviously took a punt on him. And I think we signed him for about 1.2 million or something like that. Got our money back. It obviously caused problems in the end, but what a player. So Tommy Burns didn't identify Van Hooijdonk. You know, he was given, it was presented to him. So I think that's always been there. Similarly, if you're going to use Wim Jansen as an example, two of the players that came in under Jansen were Paul Lambert and Craig Burley. They were identified by Tommy Burns. Mm-hmm. You know, the files on those two players were at Celtic Park through Tommy Burns stroke Davy Hay, but the deals were eventually done by the time Jansen come in. So we take that on board that that's going to happen, but it seems to have gone really full circle now, whereby I'm now looking at the situation we had with Julian and Bolingoli being on the bench against Cluj, whereby we're playing Callum McGregor at left back. You know, £10 million sitting on the bench. Is that because they weren't Lenny's signings? And then you look at Turnbull and Sorrow. Why did it take until October, November before they made an appearance? Is that because they weren't Lenny signings? Again, I'm speculating because we are in a situation now where obviously it hasn't worked out this season on so many levels, but a massive part of that's been recruitment. Yeah. So, you know, when we're tearing it up or restructuring the club, I think recruitment is going to be a key element of that, JP, in the summer.
So big, yeah. And just thinking back to, like you mentioned, Davy Hay there. Obviously, Davy Hay was a scout, wasn't he, in the 90s? And, you know, I'm sure Davy Hay and Tommy Burns had a close relationship, given their connected, affiliation with Celtic. And it's just, I just don't think that Neil Lennon has that connection. Well, I'm pretty sure he doesn't have that connection with Nicky Hammond, you know. And for me, it should be about the guy who's in charge of the football and operations. If that is Nicky Hammond, if that is his role, he should have meetings with Neil Lennon, just the two of them, maybe John Kennedy and Gavin Sharkey as well, but I would argue that it should just be between Nicky Hammond and Neil Lennon, and they should make the decisions and then present the players that they want to the board rather than it being the other way around. But that's a huge restructure and a huge... I've heard too many things about Peter Law wanting to have too much involvement in these transfers, and that's concerning because that really isn't his position to do that. He should be concentrating on the things that he's good at. And I know that you could say, oh, well, we've had Dembele, we've had, Sinclair or whatever other signing you want to mention, but there's been far too many bad ones. You know, you can get away with having a couple of good ones every now and then, but there's been far too many bad ones. And going back to that January list that was read out, was it Stevie Mullen read out that list of January signings over the last few years, and it was just like a sort of, who's who of Celtic, misfits. Really, it wasn't.
I know. This is the frustration as well. We look upon the records of, we brought in Van Dijk for 2.5, we sold him for 12.5, Fraser Forster, Victor Wanyama, and others. I mean, even, when you're looking at, what's his name? The North Korean player that we had. So that's the one. Yeah, completely lost him there. We've done a great profit. We made a great profit on him, and then it's continued. I mean, we made a slight profit on Gary Hooper, and we use all these as examples, shining examples. Moussa Dembele being another example, Jeremie Frimpong. But unfortunately, when you dig into the actual transfer dealings we've had, they're almost undone. By Marvin Comper, by, Sved coming in, Kouassi, Gamboa, and it goes on and on, because there's a lot worse. Bio, it looks to me as though Klamala, Ki Sung Young, how could I forget Ki Sung Young? I thought he was a fantastic player. Klamala looks as though he's going to be part of that tribe of players as well. And it's millions and millions, plus all the wages as well, JP. So all the good bits that we've done, there's a whole plethora of players that have kind of undone it, which is, by the way, it's more or less ignored whilst you're winning league after league and quadruple trebles. And we're as guilty as that as anybody, JP. We wouldn't be sitting here having that discussion if we were sitting top of the league, I guess. But I think now that it's all come to a head, this is going to be a massive part of the restructure, because it has to be. Because also you're going to have the post-COVID, post-Brexit effect, whereby we're going to have to be a lot cuter with the players coming in. Another big part of that, I guess, will be the youth situation, whereby we are developing youth players and I don't include Frimpong in that, although we did develop him, who, are leaving the club before they've kicked a ball for us. That's a big concern. Liam Morrison, Barry Hepburn, both going to Bayern Munich, Conor McBride to Blackburn, and Josh Adam to Manchester City. Then a couple of the guys who have made fleeting appearances, Dembele and Okoflex, also perhaps leaving in the summer. So then you think to yourself, can we offer them the platform that we have previously to develop?
With regards to the young players like Dembele and Okoflex, Brendan Rodgers made a comment about players, which, as much as people, don't have a lot of time for Brendan Rodgers anymore, myself included, for the way that he left us, but he obviously, did a lot of good things when he was here and led us to unprecedented success. But he mentioned something about the young players, and he said, I wouldn't say you're a Celtic player until you're playing in the first team. He said, I don't know if he was trying to, leave a Jock Stein style quote, he's nowhere near that man as far as I'm concerned, but he was trying to leave a Jock Stein style quote and saying, you're not a Celtic player until you're playing in the first team. Until then, you're just an employee or something like that, or you work for Celtic, you work for the club. Because he said, I see all these young players, cutting about with their Louis Vuitton wash bags, and they think they've made it before they've actually done anything. And you mentioned it on the show the other day. Like Dembele probably thinks he's made it as a footballer because he's been in a Nike advert and because he's had a lot of good press. He's not done anything yet. And yeah, you could say, oh, he's not had the chance. Why has he not had the chance? Because I don't think he's got the right attitude. And we've heard murmurings that would point in that direction. So if he decides to leave, or and his agent and his family decide to move him on to another team, I'd be very interested to see how he gets on in that other team or in that other club, because I don't think, if he's wanting to progress his career, I don't think they'll stand for that sort of attitude from a player. And it's all about attitude. You only need to look at the players that have left Celtic in the past that have gone on to do absolutely nothing, players that have been lauded as young prospects that have gone on to do nothing in the game. And you would never wish that to happen on somebody, but it's about the player's attitude, and that's why players are successful or not successful at Celtic. Frimpong has been successful because of his attitude at training, and he applied himself and he got a chance. Scott Brown said to Neil Wennon, this guy's good enough to play in our team. And he got in, and look at what's happened. He's got a move. It's because he came in, and fair enough, we all criticised him for his final ball, but he did have quite a lot of good performances for Celtic in his sort of weird right wing back midfield role, and then he's got his move. But the others haven't yet. They haven't come in and got 7, 8, 9s out of 10s over a course of time. So I'm not going to lose sleep over the fact that Celtic might lose players that haven't got the right attitude. It's when you start losing players, maybe like Liam Morrison. That's my friend Michael knows Morrie's dad from Saltcoats, and they're good people and good stock. And that's the type of player you don't want to be losing, because if he comes back to bite us as a international centre half in a few years to come, then that's when you're concerned,
Oh, definitely. I've been reminded by Kevin B on YouTube, Cameron Harper going back to America as well. Yep, I forgot to mention Cameron Harper. Now, with that in mind, the Jeremie Frimpong deal has been done. He's obviously been speaking to the social media team over in Germany. My memory, my big memory of Frimpong is in the League Cup final, where Christopher Jullien scored the winning goal. Fraser Forster will be remembered for playing a fairly big part in winning that cup, JP. But I always remember Frimpong being the outball all day long. He was the outball, even though he got sent off that day. I just thought, we had our hands on something a bit special with Frimpong around about that time. Leading up to that game, he had us on the edge of our seats time and time again. I wish the guy all the best. I hope that these little elements, and it's to the casual observer like you and I, the elements of his game that can improve will be honed and coached. And if so, I think, we'll be looking at Frimpong in years to come and think, wow, he was at Celtic, But it all comes down to development. But I do take your point, and I think the classic example, of course, is Islam Farouz. I'd love to speak to Islam Farouz. We had Islam's first agent on a Celtic State of Mind before we went broadcasting live. It was John Colquhoun, and I had a really good discussion with John around Islam Farouz. I think everything changed when he got a new agent. His attitude changed, JP. It was all about the money and the profile and the status. No longer in the game. No longer in the game. Doesn't even play. So that really is a warning sign for any young player coming through, that you could get carried away with the Instagram and the Louis Vuitton toilet bag and all that stuff and the earphones. Make sure you're playing football when you're actually making a difference, because the flip side of that is there's Frimpong came in as a 300 grand development player from Man City at the same time as Leo Connor, who around about that time was probably ahead of him in terms of his development. And you see what Frimpong's done compared to O'Connor. So fair play to him. Good luck to Frimpong. And JP, it's been an absolute pleasure again. A wee walk down memory lane, going back to the time of Joseph Venglos as well. And we'll be... and again, we'll talk about it next week. Who knows what will happen in a week of Celtic, by which time the transfer window will have closed shut. Will we have anybody else in new? Will anyone else leave? We'll talk about it next week. So thanks once again, JP Mason, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.